Welcome back to part 2 of my episode recap of Season 1, Episode 1 of Game of Thrones. After we finish off in Essos with Daenerys, we flash back to Winterfell with Catelyn and her eldest daughter, Sansa. Sansa hears that King Robert has offered for her to marry Prince Joffrey, and she is 13, and she is a teenager, and she's still a young girl and very naive in many ways, and she just thinks it would be the most romantic thing to marry a prince. She's going on and on about Joffrey, and Catelyn, her mother, just rolls her eyes behind her, and she said, "You know, if father takes his position, he would be the second most powerful man in the kingdom." So Catelyn was like, "Yes, but he'd also have to leave Winterfell, he'd have to leave me, and if you go with him to marry Joffrey, you would as well." Sansa begs her to let her marry Joffrey because being a queen one day is the only thing I've ever wanted. So we cut to the feast, and they threw a feast for King Robert because he came, and he's the king. And at this feast, he got a little bit tipsy, and, well, more than tipsy, and he was getting a little touchy-feely with some of those servers right in front of his wife. We then cut to outside, and we see Jon Snow practicing using his sword with a dummy in the courtyard. And then this man comes, Uncle Benjen Stark. Benjen Stark is Eddard or Ned Stark brother, and he runs up to Jon, he gives him a big old hug, and they exchange pleasantries. Apparently this man is one of Jon's favorite people in the world. So Benjen asks Jon, "Why are you out here and not in the feast?" And Jon tells him that Catelyn thought it would be an insult if he was there, considering he was a bastard. Benjen says, "You know, you're always welcome to come with me to the wall," which is where that deserter came from. And Jon's like, "Yeah, let's go. Come on, you go tell Ned, and I'll come with you today. Not a single problem." But Benjen said, "You know, if you go to the wall, you're not going to be able to father children." And Jon's like, "I don't care about that." And he goes, "You would if you knew what it meant." So Jon again pleads for him to go to the wall and whatever, and they just leave it at that. So Benjen goes to enter the feast, and who comes in next but this man, Tyrion Lannister, my man, one of my favorite characters in all of Game of Thrones. He comes into the courtyard, and he also sees Jon Snow battling the dummy, and he's like, "I know who you are." And Jon looks at him and goes, "I know who you are." In their exchange, he makes the mistake of calling Jon a bastard, and Jon gets very insulted by it. He says, "Yes, I am Ned Stark's son." And Tyrion offers him a bit of advice. He says, "Never forget what you are, the rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you." Jon thinks for a minute and then looks at him and says, "Well, what do you know about being a bastard?" And he said, "All dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes." So even though he may be a full-fledged Lannister, just because he's a dwarf, his father treats him like a bastard child. Then we get this scene between Ned and Benjen when Benjen goes in, and Ned asks about the deserter that he had to take care of, and Benjen says point blank, the other two men he's been with have never been found. And Ned was like, "Oh, it was probably a wildling or something." And Uncle Benjen's not too sure about that. Obviously, Ned is feeling very guilty about this boy and is looking for Benjen to help him in some kind of way. We then get this little scene between Catelyn and Cersei, and as Robert's making a fool out of both of them by being touchy-feely, handsy with all the women at the feast, and Cersei's becoming more and more embarrassed, she tries to just pull her into conversation, and she asks if this is the first time she's been up north and whatever, and then Sansa comes over, and this is the first time Cersei has interacted with Sansa, and she calls her Little Dove, and she calls her beautiful and compliments her dress, and then she asks her if she has started bleeding yet, which is a very personal topic, and Sansa gets very flustered and looks at Catelyn. And Catelyn's just like, well, she's the queen, answer her. And so she tells her no. And Sansa, like, flusters off. And because she's only 13, she's still a little girl. And Cersei's like, we might have a grandchild together one day, and this and that. And so trying to, find out information on whether she's old enough to marry Joffrey and whether she could bear children. And then we get this scene between Jaime and Ned, and Jaime tries to assert dominance over Ned, and it's like, oh, when you come down to the south, there'll be a tournament. I can't wait to fight you in a tournament. And he goes, oh, that's right, you don't fight in tournaments, you're too old. Well, Ned doesn't miss a beat, and he says, and I quote, when I fight a man for real, I don't want him to know what I can do. Basically saying to Jaime, you'll never see me coming. Don't bark up this tree. Now, I'm sorry, as a huge Stark fan, I was like, woohoo, go Ned. So Arya flicks some food at Sansa. She loses her mind because Joffrey's looking at her, and now she's embarrassed. So Catelyn Stark kind of gives the nod to Robb, and Robb goes, picks up Arya, off to bed. So that was just a fun little laughing scene that we see from sisters being sisters. Then we have this touching scene between Ned and Catelyn. After the feast, they're in bed for the night, and she says, I really don't want you to go. He says, I don't want to go either. He goes, but he is the king, and he takes what he wants. So they are interrupted in this loving, sweet moment by a knock on the door. Master Luwin comes in with a note from Lady Catelyn's sister, Jane Arryn, who also happens to be Jon Arryn. Remember him on the slab in the Sept in King's Landing with Cersei and Jaime? She tells her that she thinks that Jon Arryn was murdered and that the Lannisters were behind it and that King Robert's life is in danger. Well, Ned just sits up and goes, well, she's grief-stricken. She just lost her husband. She's been through trauma. Maybe it's not true. Maybe she's exaggerating. And Catelyn cuts him right off. She went back to the Eyrie. She fled the capital and went back to the Eyrie, which is the Tully family home, and they were both Tullys. Their maiden name is Tully. So took her son and left the capital. And she said she wouldn't have done that. She hasn't been there since her wedding day. And she also said, Ned, think about this. Look at the accusation she's putting in this letter. If anyone had found it, she'd be dead. So this has to be the truth. And knowing how Catelyn feels and listening to the actual logistics of it, Ned realizes that Robert's life is in danger. And if this is so, he has to go down to King's Landing to help him be the hand to try to protect his best friend. We cut back to Essos, and it is the wedding ceremony, and there's such debauchery going on, and just really, really a horrible scene for Dany to witness, and it's just fighting, and a man is killed right in front of her, and she is shocked and appalled. Keep in mind, in the books, Daenerys is only about, 12, 13? And this is her wedding, and she's seeing a man get disemboweled in front of her. And that's when we do meet Sir Jorah Mormont. I think I mentioned it before, but it's in this scene that he gives her the books, and Ilios gives her the dragon's eggs, and Khal Drogo gives her a beautiful, beautiful white horse. And then we have the wedding night scene where the two of them aren't really speaking the same love language. They're not. And I'll just leave it at that. Then we have a scene between Robert and Ned. Not this scene particularly, but I couldn't find a better picture of them together that wasn't too dark to put on a screen. And Ned officially accepts his offer to be Hand of the King. And Robert's enthralled. He's so happy. He said, you're my best friend, and I know I'll feel safe with you there. And, they go out hunting to celebrate. And on the way out hunting, Ned sees Bran standing there, and he kind of gives him a smile and a nod, and Bran smiles and nods back. And then, despite Catelyn's warnings, Bran goes and starts climbing towers. He hears noise, he peers in, and he sees Jaime, the queen's brother, and Cersei, the queen, doing the deed. And, Bran is grabbed by Jaime, and he asks him what he sees, and he says, and how old are you? And he goes, 10. And he heard that, and he said, the things I do for love, and pushes him out the window. If you liked my recap, like it. If you have any comments, comment. And as always, follow me for more Game of Thrones content.